Hello everyone, Sidewin here. Today I'm making the promised video about Unholy Champions in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This video is again about level 1 and I will be covering many of the same topics as I did in the video about Holy and Unsanctified Champions. However, I'm focusing on the evil side here. To be an Unholy Champion, you pretty much have to be of evil alignment, or potentially a strict lawful neutral or neutral who follows a evil deity. In general, though, the tenets of the various vows tend to encourage evil characters, and it can be somewhat difficult to fit into a good party. However, with this video, I am going to be focusing on that playing a evil champion within a more good aligned party rather than the less common scenario of playing an evil champion in an evil party. Because in general, if you're doing that and you're lawful, it's fairly easy to fit it in with your average evil party. For instance, if you're playing the Bloodlord's campaign path. Alright, so an overview of the class. The champion is an expert in fortitude and will saves and trained in reflex saves, indicating that poisons and mental effects are somewhat less likely to succeed. However, this can be counterbalanced by the low reflex, especially as champions tend to lean towards heavy armor. The champion automatically gets religion and one skill from their deity. This depends on the specific deity, so you always want to check. And if your background gives one of those two skills, then you get to pick one more of your choice. Then you also get 2+ intelligence additional skills. For armor, you can use any armor out there, but in general, most champions use heavy armor, starting with medium armor at level 1. Although there are a small contingent that choose to go a more dex-based route, you have to build specifically for that, and much of the class is based around shields and heavy armor. On the weapon side, you have proficiency in simple and martial weapons, and there's a special ability which gives you higher damage dice on simple weapons if your deity's favored weapon is that. So for instance, if your deity's favored weapon is a crossbow, then you can up the damage die one step. It also gives you martial proficiency on an advanced weapon if your deity's favored weapon is an advanced weapon. Then the overview of the class features, I'll be talking about most of these separately, is first off you have a deity, which gives you their edicts and anathemas, as well as sanctification. I'll be mentioning the inner sea deities, which can be sanctified unholy. Most of them cannot. Then you have a cause. This also gives edicts and anathemas, and you also gain a champion's reaction. So basically a special reaction you can use to do a certain effect. In general, the unholy causes give a selfish reaction, whereas the ones that don't require any specific sanctification kind of base it on their edicts and anathemas. The more selfish those are, the more likely you get a selfish reaction. Then you get a devotion spell, which is a focus spell. The way focus spells work is you have a pool of points. At first level, that's 1 point. You get 1 point for each unlocked focus spell. And your ability to select these can be limited by sanctification. I believe I put all the options still up here, but I'll skip over the one which you can't pick. Then you get a class feat at first level, like most martial classes. And finally, you get shield block. The way this works is basically with a reaction, if you raise your shield in the past turn, you can reduce the damage dealt by an attack which hits you. In general, that with the various reactions tends to push champions towards using shields. Alright, so the listing of inner sea deities which can be sanctified unholy and what I marked unholy plus. An explanation of unholy plus is basically those deities require you to be holy or unholy, although some of them will also let you be unsanctified. But the list of unholy deities is Asmodeus, Lamashtu, Norgorgor, Urgathoa, and Long Kuthon. If I remember correctly, all of these are demon or devil lords, and some of them are very popular in Cheliax. Then on the Unholy Plus side, you have some deities which are more within the standard range for Inner Sea deities, such as Abdabar, Aranzi, and Callistra. There's also Nethys, Nethys and Aurori, but it just depends. Then, what the Unholy Sanctification does is it adds the Unholy trait to all of your strikes and gives you 1 Edict and 2 Anathemas. So the edict is, do not put another's needs before your own or those of your deity. Basically, be selfish. This is why it can be somewhat difficult to fit an unholy champion into a good aligned party. Then the anathemas are, commit an entirely altruistic act, and secondly, put anyone's needs before those of your deity. Basically, this means you have to prioritize your deity above all else, and then prioritize yourself after that. So the only way an unholy champion can work in your standard party is if the party's goals selfishly benefit the champion. So for instance, if you're playing in Cheliax and are trying to fight a demon invasion, that would benefit the champion just because, well, he doesn't want to die. But if you're playing in a campaign based more on putting a rightful monarch back on the throne, the only way that a evil champion can participate in that is if they are expecting something in return. And that reciprocal trade is kind of the basis of these vows. You have to prioritize your deity, which if you're in a good party, that means you should look more at the Unholy Plus than at the Unholy, because in general, the Unholy ones have tenets that are more likely to cause conflict on top of your already conflicting ideals. And then your goal has to be to gain something in return for helping the party. Then, just like the Holy and Unsanctified champions, you have a Champion's Aura, which is 15 feet radius, determines the radius of many of your abilities, and you can suppress or resume it with 1 action. Everyone within that radius knows that you are a champion of your deity, which can also cause problems in good aligned territories if you follow a demon lord. The summary of this is basically all acts you do must be done with the expectation that they will benefit you or your deity. So basically you have to be selfish, and your selfish goals have to align with the party. So the devotion spells available are based off your font, meaning that technically you can have an evil champion play on hands, but very frequently a lot of the evil deities just give you the harm font. The exceptions on this slide are, if I remember correctly, Aurori, Abdabar, a couple of those. But the free choices for devotion spells are, first off, Shields of the Spirit. You raise your shield, and all allies within the aura gain +1 AC until the start of your next turn. And every time enemies attack your allies, they take 1d4 spirit damage. Lay on Hands lets you heal a willing living target for 6 hit points, and if that target isn't you, you give +2 status to AC. Then, you could also choose to harm an undead target, and give a -2 status to AC. Then the last one is Touch of the Void, which lets you heal a willing undead target for 6 hit points. If that target is you, then you gain a bonus to damage for 1 round. In general, this encourages evil champions to look at undead archetypes and ancestries. For instance, a skeleton would benefit from this, or Dampier. And you can also pick up, say, vampire archetype at higher levels. On the flip side, the same ability lets you harm living targets for 1d6 void damage. Same effect as Lay on Hands towards undead. Now I'm going to go into the feats and causes. As with the other video, feats available to only certain causes are only shown on those causes slides. So first off, the general set of feats available. The common ones are Faithful Steed, which gives you your own mounted animal companion, who is then sanctified like you are. Second one is Defensive Advance, which lets you raise your shield and stride, and you also get to make a strike if you end your movement next to an enemy. So this basically lets you condense 3 actions down to 2 actions in your first turn of combat. The third option is Deity's Domain, which gives you the initial domain spell from one of your deity's domains as a devotion spell. This is dependent on deity, so you can't really judge its usefulness unless you know your deity. Then the last one is Desperate Prayer. It's a free action which lets you gain a focus point once a day to cast a devotion spell. That spell must then be cast before the end of your turn. There's also some uncommon and rare feats. Not all GMs are going to allow these because they're from things like adventure paths, or they can cause a more skewed understanding. Although to note, the Unholy champion archetypes are technically uncommon in and of themselves. So the options are, first off, Agile Shield Grip, which lets you wield your shield as an agile weapon. The second one is Eversand Stance, which also lets you wield your shield as a weapon. Both of these are from the Knights of Glasswall. And then the last one is Splinter Faith. This basically means you have your own heretical version of your deity. And you can choose one domain that's not on any of your deities' lists. But that domain needs to be non-anathematic. You can't commit anathemas without losing your powers. So basically the example would be if you are a follower of, let's say, Asmodeus. You can't choose to take, say, a charity domain because he's literally like deity of greed. You can't do that. But you can otherwise come up with something fairly heretical. Alright, so now I'm starting to go for the causes. The Justice cause is available to Unholy champions just as it is to Holy and Unsanctified. Its edicts are to follow the law and respect legitimate authorities. And the anathemas are to take advantage of another and to cheat. So basically this is your strict lawfully neutral to lawful evil. With your required selfishness, basically you follow the law to the letter, never cheat anyone, but expect to be given an advantage for everything you do. Basically, this is the person who tries to climb up the bureaucracy rather than burn it down. The champion's reaction is Retributive Strike, which is triggered whenever an enemy damages your ally within your aura. The ally then gains 2+ level resistance versus the triggering damage, and if the enemy is within your reach, you can then hit them. The feat available is Nimble Reprisal, which lets you use ranged weapons for Retributive Strike. And if the enemy is within 5 feet of reach, but outside of it, you can step to put them within reach. So that feat works very well if you're using a reach weapon, and it makes the Justice cause somewhat better for ranged champions than some other causes. The first cause that is of unholy origin in this video is the Desecration cause. It has no anathemas in addition to the already existing Be Selfish, and it is the one least able to be put into a more good aligned party. Because literally, its anathemas are basically corrupt anything that's holy. If you have a good aligned cleric in the party, you try to turn them to evil. If you have a otherwise good aligned character, you are trying to make them fall. Basically, your goal is to create your own Darth Vader, repeatedly. And that does not work well with most good parties. With evil parties, it can work relatively well. It does lean towards chaotic evil characters, or neutral evil. And basically, it's interesting, but it is not my recommendation for fitting into a less evil party. It works best if you are just trying to sow chaos. The champion's reaction is Selfish Shield. It's triggered whenever an enemy damages you while they're standing within your aura. You gain 2+ level resistance versus the triggering damage. Your strikes then deal +1 spirit damage versus the enemy for 1 turn. And your feat choice is Ongoing Selfishness, which lets you gain resistance versus all strikes until the end of your next turn. The resistance is half that of the original effect, however. So basically, it's a self-preservation ability. Then the second evil cause is the Inequity cause. Basically, the summation of this is you take advantage of every little thing you can. So the edicts are, first off, destroy anything that offends you or stands in your way. You can interpret that different ways. For instance, you could just interpret it as you need to tear down their opposition, or you could interpret it as, say, kill the guy who says, no, you can't enter the palace. Then you have to take advantage of others. Cheat and steal. So this is, again, chaotic evil, neutral evil leaning thing. But basically, you do what you want and you don't let the rules stop you. Then your anathema is to bind yourself with a law other than that your deity requires. Or the base be selfish vow. So again, this is chaotic evil. It's slightly easier to fit into a good aligned party, but still very difficult because, well, you basically are supposed to be a jerk. The best way to do it is what they want is exactly what you want. So you are going to do what they need so that you get what you want. And this is the character who, at the end of the adventure, would run off with the entirety of the dragon's horde. If you're up for it, you can always talk to your GM and see if maybe the character would be the villain for the next arc. The reaction given by this inequity cause is called Destructive Vengeance. The trigger is when an enemy damages you while standing within your aura, and it's somewhat risky because you take an additional 1d6 damage from the attack, and you also deal 1d6 spirit damage to the enemy. And then until the end of your next turn, you deal 2 extra spirit damage versus that enemy. The feat available, called Vicious Vengeance, gives you a +1 circumstance bonus for those attacks after the use of Destructive Vengeance. And both increase in strength as you level. But I would recommend extremely cautious use of it because it can put you in a bad situation. Now this one's kind of ironic. The Liberation cause is not actually marked holy, although its anathemas kind of conflict with the unholy sanctification tenets. I can actually see a kind of weird way that this can go along with it. It relies upon a interesting interpretation of the force or threaten someone to act a certain way anathema. Basically, the idea would be you are an extreme, people should do whatever they want, and nothing should restrict them. You are the person who is going to be encouraging, say, you want to go do as many drugs as you want, I want to help you do that. It's basically a self-destructive and a other people destructive interpretation. So yes, you fight for freedom, you oppose tyranny, you oppose slavery, but that's because you think no one, except for your deity maybe, has a right to do that. And you interpret the force or threaten someone to act a certain way as basically, well, you can't make them, but that doesn't mean your actions can't. For example, if your goal is to get something super expensive that's sitting in the king's treasury, you're not actually forcing anyone if you break in and take it yourself. But again, it relies upon that very specific interpretation and trends towards extremely chaotic characters. You have to be somewhat flexible with the interpretation and talk with your GM more than with most of these other ones because honestly, it does conflict, just a bit. The reaction given by this cause is called Liberating Step. The trigger is an enemy grabs or restrains an ally within your aura. It basically lets you help your ally escape. And then your feat, Unimpeded Step, makes it so that your ally can step away from the enemy unimpeded after liberating step succeeds. The obedience cause is another lawful evil cause. Its edicts are enforce proper hierarchies, topple illegitimate hierarchies, lead when best suited, and the anathema is to allow one who is lesser than you to wield power over you or lead you. This fits incredibly well with the evil tenets, while also being able to fit into a good aligned party. And it's all founded upon your interpretation of what a hierarchy is. In general, on the evil side of it, the hierarchies based on blood or merit can kind of do it, or strength, fit fairly well. In general, you still are not supporting, say, charity or anything like that. But this is basically the ethos of Cheliax. And as long as you have the same goals as the party, again, it's really easy to fit in. So the champion's reaction for this one is Iron Command. The trigger is that an enemy within your aura damages you. And the effect is you command the enemy to kneel. If they do so, they fall prone as a free action, allowing for further harm to be done to them. And if they refuse, they take 1d6 mental damage. Either way, your strikes then deal additional damage against them until the end of your next turn. And the feat available is Iron Repercussions, which lets you choose to make the mental damage from the kneeling command persistent before knowing whether or not the enemy is going to obey. So basically the damage lasts a couple of turns rather than just hitting once. That is all for today. All of those are the causes available to Evil Champions in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I hope this helped explain some of the features of these champions. And I would again just want to end this video with the statement, talk to your GM and talk to them again before playing an evil champion. Thank you for watching.